The rain hammered against the cracked window of the tiny apartment in South Chicago as Maya Rivera counted the last few bills in her worn wallet. $37. That was all that stood between her and complete destitution. Her daughter, 6-year-old Emma, slept peacefully on the worn couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit, oblivious to the eviction notice taped to their door. Maya had 3 days. 3 days to come up with 2 months of rent or find herself and Emma on the streets. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting shadows that seemed to mock her situation. She had worked double shifts at the diner on Michigan Avenue for weeks, but Emma's unexpected hospital visit last month had drained every penny she had managed to save. The building where they lived was falling apart. Peeling paint, broken elevators, and the constant smell of mildew had become their reality. Mrs. Chen, their landlord, had been patient for months, but her patience had finally run out. Maya couldn't blame her. Business was business. As dawn broke over the Chicago skyline, Maya prepared for another grueling shift. She kissed Emma's forehead, left her with Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 3B, and headed out into the cold March morning. The diner was already buzzing when she arrived. Breakfast rush meant good tips, and she needed every cent. The morning passed in a blur of coffee refills, scrambled eggs, and forced smiles. Maya's feet ached, but she pushed through. Around noon, the lunch crowd started pouring in. That's when she noticed the little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7, with dark curly hair and a pink dress that looked expensive. Too expensive for this neighborhood. The girl sat alone in a corner booth, looking lost and frightened. Maya approached with her notepad. The child's eyes were red from crying. Before Maya could ask if she was okay, the girl whispered something that made Maya's blood run cold. 2 men had been following her. She had run away and hidden in the diner. She didn't know where her father was. Maya's maternal instincts kicked in immediately. She sat down beside the girl, whose name was Sophia, and tried to calm her. Sophia clutched Maya's arm with small, trembling hands. Through the diner's window, Maya spotted them. 2 men in dark suits, scanning the street, looking into shops. Her heart raced. This child was in danger. Maya made a split-second decision that would change everything. She told her manager she was taking her break, grabbed Sophia's hand, and led her through the kitchen to the back exit. They slipped into the alley behind the diner. Sophia was shaking. Maya pulled off her own jacket and wrapped it around the small girl's shoulders. They couldn't stay in the alley. Maya thought fast. Her apartment was only 6 blocks away. Emma was there with Mrs. Rodriguez. It wasn't safe to involve the neighbor, but she had no choice. They moved quickly through the streets, Maya keeping Sophia close. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every car that passed made her heart skip. When they finally reached her building, Maya practically carried Sophia up the 4 flights of stairs. Mrs. Rodriguez was shocked to see them but asked no questions when she saw the terror in Sophia's eyes. Maya quickly explained she had found the girl in trouble and needed to figure out what to do. She called the police from Mrs. Rodriguez's phone, not wanting to use her own apartment in case those men came looking. While they waited, Sophia finally opened up. Her father's name was Lorenzo Castellano. Maya's breath caught. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. Lorenzo Castellano was the most powerful man in the city's underground. A man whose name was whispered with equal parts fear and respect. A man who controlled everything from the docks to the downtown penthouses. Sophia had been on her way to school when the kidnapping attempt happened. Her bodyguard had been shot. She had run, terrified and alone, until she found the diner. Maya realized the gravity of what she had done. She had just saved the daughter of Chicago's most feared mafia boss. Before the police could arrive, Maya heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Her door burst open. 3 men in expensive suits filled her tiny living room. But they weren't the kidnappers. They were Lorenzo's men, and they had found Sophia. The lead man, a tall figure with ice-blue eyes, looked at Maya with an unreadable expression. He spoke into his phone. Just 2 words that made Maya's knees weak. "We found her." Within minutes, Lorenzo Castellano himself walked through her shabby apartment door. He was younger than Maya expected, perhaps 40, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His suit probably cost more than a year of her rent. His presence filled the small space with an intensity that was almost physical. Sophia ran to him, crying. Lorenzo held his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. His eyes closed, his jaw tight with emotion. When he finally looked at Maya, there was something in his gaze she couldn't quite identify. Gratitude mixed with curiosity mixed with something else entirely. He asked her name. She told him. He asked why she had risked everything for a stranger's child. Maya looked at Emma, still sleeping peacefully, and said simply that any mother would have done the same. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. Then he noticed the eviction notice on her door. Lorenzo's eyes moved from the eviction notice back to Maya, and something shifted in his expression. He reached into his jacket, and Maya's heart stopped for a moment, but he only pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out several crisp $100 bills and placed them on her scratched coffee table. That's when Mrs. Chun appeared in the doorway, her face twisted with fury. She had seen the expensive cars parked outside, the men in suits, and assumed the worst. Her voice cut through the room like a knife. Maya Rivera was bringing criminals into her building. She was endangering everyone. She wanted her out immediately, not in 3 days. Now, Maya tried to explain, but Mrs. Chun wouldn't listen. Years of prejudice and assumptions came pouring out. She called Maya irresponsible, reckless, a bad mother for exposing Emma to dangerous people. The words struck harder than any physical blow could have. Lorenzo attempted to intervene, offering to pay Maya's entire back rent plus 6 months in advance. But Mrs. Chun refused. She didn't want mafia money in her building. She didn't care that Maya had saved a child's life. All she saw was trouble, and she wanted it gone. The argument escalated. Other neighbors gathered in the hallway, watching the scene unfold. Some defended Maya, saying she had always been kind and quiet. Others sided with Mrs. Chun, whispering about danger and bad influence. Emma woke up, confused and frightened by the shouting. She ran to Maya, burying her face in her mother's legs. Maya felt the walls closing in. Everything she had worked for, every sacrifice she had made, was crumbling in front of her daughter's eyes. The humiliation burned through her chest. She had done the right thing, saved an innocent child, and now she was being punished for it. Mrs. Chun gave her 1 hour. 1 hour to pack whatever she could carry and leave. The money Lorenzo had offered still sat on the table, but it felt meaningless now. Money couldn't buy back her dignity or erase the shame of being thrown out like garbage in front of her neighbors. Lorenzo's men moved to forcibly resolve the situation, but he raised his hand, stopping them. He understood something the others didn't. This wasn't about money or power. This was about a woman's pride being shattered, about a child watching her mother be destroyed by circumstance and cruelty. Maya began throwing clothes into garbage bags with shaking hands. Emma cried, asking where they were going, if they would have to sleep outside like the people under the bridge she had seen. Each question was a dagger in Maya's heart. She had no answers. She had no plan. She had nothing but 2 garbage bags and a daughter who deserved so much better. Mrs. Rodriguez tried to offer them her couch, but her own husband appeared, forbidding it. He worked for the city, he said. He couldn't risk his job or reputation being associated with mob business. One by one, the neighbors who had smiled at Maya in the hallways, who had borrowed sugar and shared small talk, turned their backs. Fear was more powerful than friendship. The hour passed too quickly. Maya stood in the hallway with Emma and their meager belongings. The building that had been their home, however imperfect, was now just another place that didn't want them. She thought about the women's shelter on the west side, but they were always full. She thought about her car, but it had been repossessed 2 months ago. Lorenzo had waited. His daughter Sophia was safe in one of the cars downstairs, but he had stayed, watching this injustice unfold. Now he approached Maya again. His voice was calm, controlled, but there was an edge to it that made everyone in the hallway unconsciously step back. He made Maya an offer. Come to his estate in Lake Forest. Stay in the guest house until she got back on her feet. No strings attached. It was the least he could do for the woman who had saved his daughter's life. Maya's first instinct was to refuse. She had heard the stories about Lorenzo Castellano, about the violence, the control, the dark world he inhabited. Taking help from a man like that felt like making a deal with the devil. But Emma's small hand in hers reminded her that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She looked into Lorenzo's eyes, searching for the trap, the hidden price she would have to pay. But all she saw was a father who understood what it meant to protect a child at any cost. She saw someone who, despite everything he was, recognized the injustice of what had just happened to her. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as Maya picked up her bags. Mrs. Chun stood in her doorway, arms crossed, satisfied that she had removed the problem from her building. She had no idea that she had just pushed Maya Rivera into a world far more complicated and dangerous than a rundown apartment in South Chicago. Maya took Emma's hand and walked toward the stairs, toward the expensive cars waiting outside, toward a life she couldn't begin to imagine. She didn't look back at the building. There was nothing left there for her now except memories of failure and rejection. Lorenzo followed behind them, and Maya felt the weight of a choice she wasn't sure she should have made. The drive to Lake Forest felt like entering another dimension. Maya watched through the tinted windows as the crumbling buildings of South Chicago gradually gave way to manicured lawns and tree-lined streets. Emma pressed her face against the glass, her eyes wide with wonder at the massive houses that seemed to grow larger with each passing mile. The Castellano estate sat behind iron gates that opened automatically as their convoy approached. The main house was a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa that looked like it belonged on the cover of an architecture magazine. Fountain sculptures dotted the circular driveway. Gardens stretched as far as Maya could see, perfectly maintained despite the early spring chill. But Lorenzo didn't take them to the main house. Instead, they drove around back to what he had called the guest house. Maya almost laughed at the term. The guest house was bigger than any home she had ever lived in. 2 stories of pale stone and large windows, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that would bloom in a few weeks. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair waited at the door. Her name was Margaret, and she had been with the Castellano family for 20 years. She showed Maya and Emma inside without judgment or questions. The interior was warm and tastefully decorated. A real kitchen with marble countertops. A living room with comfortable furniture that didn't sag or have springs poking through. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. Emma ran from room to room, her earlier tears forgotten in the excitement of exploration. She found a bedroom painted pale yellow with a window seat overlooking the gardens. She turned to Maya with such hope in her eyes that Maya felt her throat tighten. When was the last time her daughter had looked that happy? Margaret explained that the house was fully stocked. Food in the refrigerator, linens in the closets, everything they might need. If they required anything else, they only had to ask. Lorenzo had arranged for Emma to be enrolled in the local elementary school starting Monday. A doctor would come by tomorrow to make sure they were both healthy after the stress of the day. It was too much. Maya sat on the edge of the plush couch after Margaret left, feeling like she was living someone else's life. This morning she had been counting bills in a dingy apartment. Now she was sitting in a house that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. The whiplash of it all made her dizzy. Emma climbed into her lap, yawning. The adrenaline was wearing off, and exhaustion was setting in for both of them. Maya carried her daughter upstairs to the yellow bedroom, tucked her into a bed with sheets that felt like clouds, and watched her fall asleep almost instantly. She stood there for a long time, just watching Emma breathe, trying to convince herself this wasn't a dream that would vanish when morning came. A soft knock on the front door startled her. Lorenzo stood on the porch, his jacket removed, his tie loosened. He looked different than he had in her apartment. Less intimidating, almost human. He asked if they had everything they needed. Maya nodded, unable to find words that felt adequate. He told her that what she did today took courage most people don't possess. She had seen his daughter in danger and acted without hesitation, without thinking about consequences or rewards. In his world, loyalty and protection meant everything. She had demonstrated both to a stranger's child. That kind of character was rare. Maya finally found her voice. She asked the question that had been gnawing at her since they left Chicago. What did he expect from her in return? Nobody gave this much for nothing. There had to be a price. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. Then he explained that Sophia's mother had died 3 years ago in a car accident that was meant for him. His daughter was the only good thing left in his life, the only part of him that remained untainted by the darkness of his business. Maya had given Sophia back to him when she could have looked the other way, when she could have let fear guide her instead of compassion. He expected nothing except that she give herself and Emma time to heal, time to figure out what comes next without the weight of immediate survival crushing them. He would make sure Emma had what she needed for school. Maya could look for work without the panic of homelessness hanging over her. When she was ready to leave, she could leave. No obligations, no debts. If you're hoping Maya finds her path forward, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. This story is just beginning to unfold, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Maya studied his face, looking for deception. But all she saw was sincerity and something else. Loneliness. This powerful man who commanded fear and respect across Chicago looked lonely standing on her porch in the fading evening light. She realized that perhaps they weren't so different. Both trying to protect their children. Both fighting battles the world didn't see. She thanked him and he left. Maya locked the door, climbed the stairs, and slipped into bed beside Emma. Through the window, she could see the main house lit up against the darkening sky. Somewhere in there, Sophia was safe because Maya had made one impulsive choice. For the first time in years, Maya allowed herself to believe that maybe things could actually get better. 3 months passed like a dream Maya kept waiting to wake from. Emma thrived at Greenwood Academy, making friends with children whose parents drove luxury cars and owned vacation homes. The little girl who had clutched a worn stuffed rabbit in a crumbling apartment now took piano lessons and attended birthday parties at country clubs. Maya found work managing the estate's extensive charitable foundation. Lorenzo had mentioned it casually one morning when she expressed her need to contribute, to not feel like a charity case herself. The position was real, demanding, and paid better than anything she could have imagined. She coordinated donations to schools, shelters, and community programs across Chicago. Ironic, she thought, that mafia money was feeding homeless families and funding after-school programs. But it was the evenings that changed everything. Sophia began joining them for dinner, initially shy, then gradually opening up. The two girls became inseparable. Emma taught Sophia how to build blanket forts. Sophia shared her love of painting. They were healing each other in ways the adults couldn't. Lorenzo started appearing more frequently. First, it was just to check on Sophia. Then he would stay for coffee. Then dinner. Maya found herself laughing at his stories about growing up in Little Italy, about his grandmother who ruled the family with an iron wooden spoon. He asked about her life, really listened when she talked about her dreams of going back to school, of building something meaningful. The walls between them crumbled slowly. Maya saw beyond the reputation to the man who read bedtime stories in silly voices, who personally cooked Sunday breakfast for the girls, who carried immense loneliness beneath his controlled exterior. Lorenzo saw beyond the struggle to the woman who possessed fierce intelligence, unwavering strength, and a capacity for love that hadn't been destroyed by hardship. The moment everything shifted happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Maya was reviewing foundation reports in the main house library when Lorenzo entered, his face dark with barely contained rage. One of his associates had discovered that the kidnapping attempt on Sophia hadn't been random. It had been orchestrated by Marco Vitali, Lorenzo's former partner, as revenge for a business dispute. But there was more. Vitali had learned that Lorenzo had grown close to Maya and Emma. He saw them as weaknesses to exploit, new targets. The threat was clear and immediate. Lorenzo's world, the violence he had tried to keep separate from them, was crashing through the protective walls he had built. Maya's first instinct was fear. Then something else rose up inside her. Anger. She had spent her entire life being pushed around by circumstances, by landlords, by poverty, by a system that didn't care. She had found something here. Peace, purpose, maybe even the beginning of love, though she hadn't dared name it yet. She looked Lorenzo in the eyes and told him she wasn't running. Not this time. If Vitali wanted to threaten her family, he would find she was tougher than she looked. Lorenzo stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he did something that surprised them both. He kissed her. The next 72 hours moved with calculated precision. Lorenzo's network mobilized across Chicago, tracking Vitali's movements, identifying his safe houses, cutting off his resources. But it was Maya who provided the breakthrough that changed everything. While reviewing foundation records, she discovered something Lorenzo's men had missed. The community center in Pilsen that had recently requested emergency funding was owned by a shell corporation. She traced the paperwork back through layers of holding companies until she found Vitali's name buried in the documents. He was using charity fronts to launder money and hide his operations. Lorenzo assembled his most trusted men. But instead of the violent confrontation everyone expected, Maya suggested something different. She had spent 3 months learning how the legitimate side of Lorenzo's business worked, how he had been slowly transitioning his empire toward legal enterprises. They could destroy Vitali without firing a single shot. They brought everything to the FBI. The money laundering evidence, the connection to the kidnapping attempt, documentation of Vitali's entire operation handed over in exchange for immunity and protection. The federal agents had been trying to build a case against Vitali for years. Maya had given them everything they needed wrapped in a neat package. The raids happened at dawn. Vitali and 17 of his associates were arrested simultaneously across the city. The news covered it as a major breakthrough against organized crime. What they didn't report was the deal that had been struck behind closed doors, the understanding that Lorenzo Castellano was now working with authorities, not against them. That evening, Lorenzo found Maya in the garden where she often sat with her thoughts. The threat was over. Vitali would spend the rest of his life in prison. Sophia and Emma were safe. But now came the harder question. What happened next? Maya had been thinking about this moment. She had fallen in love with Lorenzo, truly and completely. Not because he had saved her from the streets, but because she had seen his heart beneath the armor. She had watched him transform from the feared mafia boss into a father who made pancakes shaped like hearts. A man who wanted to build something better for his daughter's future. But love wasn't enough if the foundation was built on fear and violence. She needed to know he meant what he said about leaving that world behind. She needed the truth about what kind of life they would be building together. Lorenzo took her hands. He told her that meeting her had changed everything. She had shown him that strength didn't have to come from fear, that power could be used to build instead of destroy. He was done with the old ways. His lawyers were already restructuring everything. Real estate development, legitimate investments. The charitable foundation would become the centerpiece of a new legacy. He asked her to stay, not as a guest, not as someone he owed, but as his partner in building this new life, as his equal, as the woman he loved. Maya looked toward the house where their daughters were probably building another blanket fort. She thought about the scared woman who had counted $37 in a crumbling apartment. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned that sometimes the biggest risks led to the most beautiful transformations. She said yes. 2 years later, the spring sun warmed the gardens of what was now officially the Castellano Rivera estate. Maya stood on the terrace of the main house, watching Emma and Sophia practice their dance routine for the upcoming school talent show. Both girls were 9 now, inseparable as always, their laughter carrying across the perfectly manicured lawn. The charitable foundation had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. They now operated 12 community centers across Chicago, providing after-school programs, job training, and support services to families just like Maya's had been. Last month, they had opened a shelter specifically for single mothers facing eviction. Maya had insisted on naming it Margaret's house, after the woman who had welcomed her without judgment on that first overwhelming day. Lorenzo emerged from his office, loosening his tie. His transformation had been remarkable. The federal cooperation had cleared the way for legitimate business ventures. He now sat on the boards of 3 major corporations and had become an unexpected advocate for criminal justice reform. The man who had once ruled through fear now commanded respect through integrity. He wrapped his arms around Maya's waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Next week marked their first wedding anniversary. The ceremony had been small and intimate, just family and close friends. Sophia had been the flower girl. Emma had served as junior maid of honor. Both girls had cried happy tears when Lorenzo officially adopted Emma 6 months later. Maya had completed her degree in social work through Northwestern's evening program. She was now the foundation's executive director, overseeing a staff of 43 people. The scared woman who had served coffee and dodged eviction notices felt like a character from someone else's story. Mrs. Chun had reached out 3 months ago. The building in South Chicago had been sold to developers. She was facing her own eviction from the apartment she had lived in for 30 years. She called Maya, voice small with shame, asking if the foundation could help. Maya had wanted to feel vindication, but all she felt was compassion. She personally arranged for Mrs. Chun to move into one of the foundation's senior housing units, rent-free. Some cycles needed to be broken, not perpetuated. Sophia ran up to the terrace, breathless and excited. She had been accepted into the Young Artists program at the Art Institute. Emma was right behind her, equally thrilled. They wanted to celebrate with ice cream downtown, just the 4 of them, like a normal family on a normal Saturday. Lorenzo looked at Maya, and she saw everything reflected in his eyes. Gratitude, love, wonder at how a single moment of courage in a diner had led to this beautiful, complicated, perfect life. As they loaded into the car, Sophia riding up front with her father, Emma chattering beside Maya in the back. Maya thought about that rainy morning 2 years ago, the eviction notice, the $37, the choice to protect a frightened child instead of protecting herself. Sometimes the worst moments crack you open just wide enough to let the light in. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you were always meant to have. They drove toward the city, a family built not from blood alone but from courage, compassion, and the radical belief that people deserve second chances. All of them, even mafia bosses, even struggling single mothers, even scared little girls who just needed someone to choose love over fear.